can we note the little slideshow of just the worst politicians in the past decade just hanging out with every single, like, important person from this group? And we got, like, a Newt Gingrich in there. Who are some of the other good ones? And by good,
George
I mean
W.
people. George W,
Notably.
yeah.
Always George W. Come on.
Gotta push for the ideal. I forgot how unbelievably homophobic he is, and I'm just so glad him and Ellen can hang out now.
Welcome to Bible Boys, a podcast where two ex-evangelical siblings and an ex-Catholic non-sibling watch Christian media and either praise or condemn it. I'm Aaron.
I'm Sad.
And I'm Michael.
This week, we examine the ex-gay movement with Netflix documentary Pray Away. Before we have a really depressing talk about conversion therapy, please be sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, like and comment on our video, and follow us on Twitter at The Bible Boys. Well,
Happy New Year!
I want to just give the audience a little glimpse into what, like, after the pod looks like. You know, when we're stacking up the chairs after our youth service, and it's just the three of us in, like, the little church that we record in.
Eating the stale donuts that are left over.
Yeah. Michael is, dumping out the very old coffee that no one touched. I had an idea, because Michael has a lot of documentaries that he wants us to watch, of a docu-January, where, like, this January we only watch documentaries, and I thought that was a cool theme. I'm so glad that Aaron and Michael looked at me and went, hey, you're going to get so depressed that if we do this, we're genuinely concerned for your health. Between this and the seasonal depression, I could not handle back-to-back weeks of these documentaries, Michael. This one was rough.
Yeah, like, okay, my hot take here is this documentary could have been rougher.
Oh, for sure.
I think that they maybe made the softest, most informative without... Like, they pulled a couple of punches. This documentary, so for those who aren't familiar, Pray Away is a documentary that came out in 2021 that is actually more about the ex-gay leadership than it is about conversion therapy or presently ex-gay members. They do feature one very prominent quote-unquote ex-trans person. And I personally would argue that perhaps in seeking redemption, they maybe shied away from some of the darker corners of all of this.
I want to have a conversation up front because the individual Michael was pointing at, the ex-trans, so many quotation marks, ex-trans individual. I want to be very careful when we talk about, like, this subject, because it is kind of tricky. How do we want to refer to them in this podcast to make sure we're still being respectful?
I mean, they call themselves ex-gay. I mean, I think we have to call them the way that they want to be called, right? I'm not gonna, misidentify them. If they ask to be called that, that's what they want. So I think we should probably refer to them. We're going to be referring to them as ex-gay or ex-trans or whatever. But yeah, I mean, if you couldn't tell, this episode contains content warnings for transphobia, homophobia, conversion therapy, sexual assault, and self-harm. So, like, it's gonna be a sad one. But keep that in mind. Yeah, we're gonna be dealing with these topics. But I think you're right, Michael. There's right, when we talk about people who have led movements and then done this big turnaround where they realize their movements they have led are actually very harmful, and they do these kind of like mea culpa things. There is always a level of like, what is your responsibility to the community that you harmed, and we'll talk about that at the end. But yeah, I 100% agree. They could have gone so much harder than they didn't. And I guess I'm glad for that, because this documentary wasn't as brutal as I had to endure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it was all that brutal at all. And maybe this will be my hottest of hot takes in the episode. Maybe it's more helpful that it wasn't so brutal. Um, we have seen, and there are plenty of, and this documentary doesn't shy away from individual stories of ex-gay members and like ex-gay members and people who have been forced into conversion therapy, but offers kind of a more helpful framing of what does it look like when you renounce that? And I think truthfully, like some of preventing this from happening is getting people to renounce it, right? So like one of the biggest organizations that's featured in this, Exodus International, does not exist anymore. And that is a really good, really positive thing. So in 2012, Exodus International's leader, Alan Chambers, actually addressed a gay Christian network and said that the majority, meaning 99% of them, people I met, have not experienced a change in their orientation, apologized for the slogan "change is possible," believe that any sexual activity outside a heterosexual monogamous relationship is sinful. However, he said that conversion therapy is harmful and does not work, and that I don't believe cure is a word that is applicable to any real struggle, homosexuality included. For someone to put out a shingle and say, I can cure homosexuality, that to me is as bizarre as someone saying they can cure any other temptation or struggle anyone faces on planet Earth. He also apologized, and a board member actually said, hey, this doesn't negate the way God used Exodus positively, but we should maybe not do conversion therapy because it's really harmful and abusive. And look, like, I think you are absolutely entitled as an individual to think whatever is sin and whatever is not sin. You are not entitled to treat people differently based on that, and especially not entitled to abuse people based on that.
I really struggled emotionally with this movie because I don't know how deep we want to get with like the storyline of this entire process is the documentary as a whole is just following the leadership as they kind of figure out, oh God, this is fucked up. Right. And like I don't know how deep we want to get to each personal story, but across the board I really struggled with the idea of like a mix of anger and sympathy and also a bit of shame because, you know, as we've discussed a million times, I had a homophobic phase. I was little, but yeah, I believed a lot of the things they said. So, of course, I think a lot of the anger is from projecting. But this was a complicated emotional roller coaster in my brain, and I still don't know where I land with my feelings towards these individuals because I'm happy that they, you know, found their way out of this. I'm happy that they're talking and saying, hey, what I did was fucked up. And as one of the individuals says at the end, like, how do you deal with the blood on my hands? Well, I'm too scared to look down. Part of me is like, you have to look down. Like, you need to look at what you did. And I think that they're doing that a bit, but yeah, I don't know if, I know that's kind of rambly, but that's how my brain was the entire time.
Yeah, Michael, since this is your episode, do you want to do a quick overview of the various, characters, I guess? Or, do you want to go beat by beat?
Yeah, I think just like a quick, very overarching overview feels more helpful, if you ask me. Another hot take here, I think the individual stories are less... the individual stories of the leaders, to me, were less impactful than listening to them in aggregate and realizing how many of these people kind of had the same story in different ways. And also realizing how, like, as a young queer kid in a conservative church, how easy that was to be an off-ramp. So let's start with John Polk. I think he's a very, very interesting person. So John Polk is a ex-gay. person. So we see him today, and he has renounced the ex-gay movement, conversion therapy. That all happened in 2013. He founded a ministry called Love One Out. That is an ex-gay ministry all about like how basically he found a wife who was also an ex-gay person. Talks about stories of he himself being told, like, you only need to be attracted to one woman because that's the woman you're going to marry. And, you know, these things are really common in biblical, like, twists of evangelical Christianity and of conservative groups, where you have people saying, well, you know, because God designed us by nature to be monogamous, that you just need to be attracted to one woman. And it, you know, I used to joke, for anyone who has ever watched True Blood, I stole this line from them. I used to joke that there was no magical fairy vagina out there for me that was just going to hypnotize me and turn me straight. And that was kind of John's whole shtick with his organization, Love One Out. He ended up being a chairman of Exodus International North America. He would later actually go to a gay bar, and then he was kind of swiftly ousted. So this was in 2000 in Washington, D.C., no less. He walked into this bar. The Human Rights Campaign was contacted, which is just, this is such a wild story to me.
It's also incredibly DC.
Yeah, it really is. And Wayne Benson of the Human Rights Campaign arrived at the bar 40 minutes later, confronted him. He denied it was him, saying that he was a man called John Clint, which, my boy, don't out your porn name like that. And then he said, wait, I didn't know this was a gay bar. I stopped in to use the bathroom, but he had been there for more than an hour, flirted with men, and then also said he was gay. He was called in to focus on the family headquarters and questioned by none other than Bible Boys villain James Dobson. Puck was like, I don't know what you're talking about, and then said, you know what? Yeah, I was here to talk to other men. He was kind of put on a form of a leave, and then he was able to resume his position in Focus on the Family. And Exodus released a press conference saying John's actions represent a serious lapse in sound judgment. His decision to enter a gay establishment for any reason opens him up to all kinds of speculation by both other Exodus leaders and the gay community. And he chose to leave the position of manager of the, I can't believe this is a real name, Homosexuality and Gender Department of Focus on the Family, until he decided, he decided to leave in 2003. But it did take him 10 years to renounce his belief in conversion therapy. He said, hey, look, I am a Christian. I am gay. I think that conversion therapy is really harmful. And then he and his wife would get a divorce. His wife did notably not partake in this particular documentary. We can really only assume how she feels because she is actually the executive director of a group called Restored Hope Network, which is an interdenominational ex-gay ministry by a bunch of former Exodus people that basically when Exodus shut down its doors, they all just scooched on over there because they do still support conversion therapy and are basically fighting to keep it legal.
It's wild to me the almost Avengers level unification of terrible denominations throughout Christianity that especially it still exists now, but especially in the early 2000s, late 90s when it came to gay marriage, where it's the only thing that every Protestant could agree upon was that gay people were bad, and they even mention that when it comes to Prop 8, and that there was a big multi-denominational movement, and it's weird. It's weird that that's the thing that they're able to unify on.
Yeah. I mean, and it united some Catholics too. Like that's the thing. This really was a unifying thing for a lot of Christians of what if we were homophobic? Like big time.
I do love when the Pope tweets that out every 6 months. And he does like a little smiley face next to it. What if I was homophobic? JK, unless. Anyway, where are y'all's kids?
Listen, we cannot start on Pontifex's tweets or we're going to be here all night.
I think we actually can.
But it's a very interesting story that like he goes through, and it's almost the building block that a lot of other people will follow, where, he was discussing that he kind of realized, I can either keep this a secret, and one day that's it. Like, I won't be able to survive. Or I can go try to figure this out and, give up my life, my community.
I think the coldest, shortest take on all of this is sexuality is complicated and attempting to define it rigidly is a fool's errand.
And, like, if you look at the other people that they talk about, all of them come to this, like, weird crossroads where they're either confronted with something externally that makes them look inwardly, or, like him, it's the, like, inward emotions clawing their way out, and you have to either accept it, or the other route is very bleak, that he, stated. And it's very depressing, because a lot of these people were like, we had to put a front that we weren't tempted, that, all the gay thoughts were gone. Meanwhile, everyone inside their own brains were still the same.
The most interesting aspect of this documentary to me was the sincerity with which all the, ex-gay leaders expressed that they were, committing to their missions. Like, every single one of them was just like, I thought what I was doing was right. And, these movements were founded in part because they wanted to be like, hey, I quote unquote struggle with my homosexual attraction, and I need, people are always going to be looking for communities, and they, look for a community within their community. And, there is a genuine, sincere desire to adhere to the whatever incarnation of Christianity's morals that they thought were proper in all of them. Like, we think of a lot of, at least I do, when I think of, conversion therapy. I think of, in my home state of Indiana, straight cishet politicians, being like, we want to use this as a weapon to beat down, queer people. But the fact that it was mostly queer people leading this, push towards conversion therapy was very, sobering to me, because it's just the same conversation we have with abortion, which is that, they 100% believe in what they're doing. It's hard to watch people. I think especially the story of Julie was really, really hard. Who is like this girl who came out to her mom as a queer person when she was like 16, and her mom like instantly stuck her into a conversion therapy camp, Living Hope, and like she was there until she was 25.
Well, and like she ended up on the speaking circuit for Exodus, and like ended up being very like a poster child kind of for what you can do.
And she was the individual that, like, her sexual assault was outed. Like, she was pressured very heavily into revealing that to a crowd, because it fit into a narrative that gay people all are sexually assaulted, and that's what makes them gay. And that was the narrative the church was trying to push. And that's real bleak.
And I mean, Exodus International, I do think something you said was really important there, right? Like, Exodus International was an arm for a homophobic church features and power structures, right? Like, we should kind of look at Exodus International as an arm of homophobic church structures.
Yeah. Can we note the little slideshow of just the worst politicians in the past decade just hanging out with every single, like, important person from this group? And we got like a Newt Gingrich in there. Who are some of the other good ones? And by good,
George
I mean
W.
people. George W.
Notably.
Yeah,
Always George W. Come on.
gotta push for the ideal. I forgot how unbelievably homophobic he is, and I'm just so glad him and Ellen can hang out now. I'm really glad they put their differences aside. And, he looks at her and goes, I don't think you should be allowed to live in America. And she's like, this game is really funny. Want some French fries?
Ellen's like, I'm rich enough that I don't give a shit what you think.
You want to dance in front of the pores?
Yeah, it is a sobering reminder that maybe we shouldn't rehabilitate people unless they've apologized. Like, I don't know. I'm a big believer in that people should kind of be taken at face value, right? Like, we should look at the actions of these people as what they are. And for some people, that will mean, like, I choose not to engage with this person. I see their name and I look away, and that's absolutely your prerogative. I look at, what was her name? Julie Rogers in particular, and go, that is a path I could have seen my life taken, had a few things shaken out a little differently, and she has now dedicated her life after Exodus dissolved into helping queer people and really cultivating relationships in the queer Christian community. And I think that's great, and I think she deserves every bit of rehabilitation that she gets, especially given that she was a child when all of this started and really didn't get out of this until her brain was fully formed anyway. But it is a reminder, your people like Bush and Gingrich, they've never even been like, whoops, got that one wrong. So
No.
we shouldn't really
and
rehabilitate.
they still hold those views. So
Yeah.
Sorry, train of thought died still thinking of George Bush in that stupid interview where he's like, we just gotta push for the ideal. I forgot how unbelievably homophobic just the country was and is. But I do find it interesting that almost in lockstep 3 movements formed, and that's like, the gay rights movement gaining steam in the country, and then you also have the ex-gay movement popping up as like a counter thing, and then within a few years you have a ex-gay movement moving. And the speed in which they all kind of develop and interact with each other is very interesting, and I think it highlights just how deep indoctrination can get you. That we've discussed it a million times, where if you're raised in this and this is your community, I think Julie even said that, like, she had to go through therapy because she was incredibly needy, and because no one, her entire life, everyone told her that she wasn't good enough. So these people are seeking out community, and the only places they're finding it are ones telling you this is what you have to do to be loved.
So this kind of reminded me of like the insidious nature of The Way Down, where when your community is so culty and toxic, but you're getting that reinforcement from them, of course you're going to stay in it. So I think the two had more similarities than anyone would like to admit. You're looking for that. And, I felt so much for Julie. I gotta say, she was the person who, like, just hit home. I thought that what she's doing now is great. You can tell this is someone that has a lot of baggage from all of the hurt inflicted on her. I mean, she talks about self-harm. She talks about depression. I kind of purposefully skirt not around that, but don't highlight and focus on it centrally, because that is so largely featured in gay stories that I think we all know that is a feature, right? Like, unless you have been asleep and never, ever, 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 ever seen a gay person in media, you know that this is a reality, that coming out is hard, and that you're going to have homophobes, and that, you're going to go into a deep, dark place in response to that. I think that what makes Julie's story so interesting is that she got out at a relatively young age, and that truly she was really used so consistently through that. I mean, she talks about that a lot, how she feels like she was used by the movement, and she was.
I mean, she literally says people would come up to her and go, God gave me a vision of you speaking in front of thousands. And that does something to your brain when you're not old enough to process information. Like, that's insane.
I also think that, to pivot off of this conversation about the way that Julie was used, Julie is absolutely probably, the most sympathetic person in this doc, but the ways in which, the stories of these ex-gay people are weaponized, I think this doc does a really good job of highlighting the insidious ways those were used, specifically with our ex-trans person Jeffrey, and with Yvette, who was a Family Research Council policy analyst, quote unquote. We see Jeffrey at the beginning of the doc, like going out in front of stores and like talking about how he used to be live as a trans woman and now he doesn't. And we see the ways in which he ends up founding a whole new resurgence of ex-gay activism in the right wing. I talk about that a little bit later, but basically he has this counter freedom march, and like that's his whole thing, is getting ex-gay people together to do street demonstrations. And then we see Yvette, who is a bisexual woman who worked for Fox News in the 90s. And like that was wild just to see the ways in which she was able to go on TV and use her story and be like, I had like 15 friends die of AIDS. I know how dangerous the homosexual lifestyle is. Like, that's a hard thing to argue against if you're a cis person trying to argue for gay rights, or a cishet person.
I mean, I found personally, maybe this is different here, given that background, this is going to sound wild, and we'll go to her story next. I found Yvette like maybe the second most sympathetic person in all of this after that. Just given kind of her history here. She spent 14 years working for ex-gay ministries. She came out when she was 21 in 1987, and then became involved with the church, and just her like natural ability to speak and her charisma, which she has plenty of. Like, you see this woman on a stage saying these like insidious, awful, like parroting these right-wing talking points, but she says them in a way that is so charming and disarming that you're like, oh, Yvette. And you can see why it would work on someone who is like questioning, maybe like, am I wrong for this? Is this possible? Or a parent of a child that's like, hey, my religion has told me this for years. And she worked with the Family Research Council up until 2001, and then ran a ministry called Grace Christian Fellowship and was consulting. She worked at Exodus International. She was brought in to work on Proposition 8, which was California's successful ballot proposal that banned same-sex marriage in the state. She used like the slippery slope argument of talking about, and this is nothing novel here, she doesn't get credit for this, no one does, for saying that, oh, it'll lead to pedophilia, bestiality. I mean, these are tales as old as times. We're seeing it with the transgender movement now happening, where trans people are like, what if we had some rights? And conservatives are like, what next? You're going to identify as a horse. And it's like, well, no. Actually, that's not what anyone is saying.
Also, the joke's so funny, conservatives. It gets us every time. We laugh and it makes us so mad. Oh,
yeah,
anger.
Who's saying conservatives aren't funny?
Yeah, have you heard that banger? Whew.
They do have one joke. It's that, and I hate my wife.
And California's communist.
Right, California that passed Proposition 8 only back in 2008, so let's sit on that one for a sec. In 2010, Yvette started having serious panic attacks and went to a psychiatrist who was like, anyone told you might have some PTSD? And I'm just like imagining the scene of this like ex-gay woman who is like using her platform to speak out against everything that she is, walking into a psychiatrist and the psychiatrist being like, "Hey, you're basically the human equivalent of a alert, you are doing something wrong sign. Have you thought about not doing that thing?" And Yvette going, "Holy shit, that's an option?" Because when you're only around religious people, you never know that that's an option. And so she actually stepped down from Exodus that same year, which is before it shut down. And maybe that's why I give her some credit, is like, it did take something personal for her to wake up to it. But I think where my sympathy lies is if you are someone coming around in the 80s, watching queer people die left and right, and you're looking for a reason to explain it. And the only ones, like, no one has an explanation, but the only ones deigning to even attempt to are like wild right-wing conservatives saying it's God's punishment. How many friends do you have to have die, and how many times do you have to hear that before you start really internalizing it? Especially when that is combined with the societal treatment that being gay is different or bad, right? Like, I think it's easy for us to forget in 2022 that, did you all know that being gay wasn't always cool?
For my fellow Zoomers out there, there's a little thing called George W. and also Ronald Reagan. Just do some Googling. Maybe add Stonewall into that. Not Jackson. Riots. Got him.
Yeah, and so, this journey led Yvette to realizing, hey, I'm bisexual. I can still love my husband and love the life we built together, and also not espouse these hateful views.
I did love that, like, I think the reason I liked her a lot was at the very end of it, she was like, yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, it is, because a lot of times in these stories it gets very binary, because sexuality is complicated. It can get weird, and there's a lot of gray areas. So just having someone go, yeah, it's a little complicated, but what I was saying was super wrong still. I liked having that little bit of nuance in there.
I think Yvette's understanding of like the nuances of the arguments that she was making, is what made her such a, opposing or not imposing, figure when she was working in those ex-gay, movements, because like, she says this quote, which is like, I was always thinking of what I could say to scare people off of the fence and onto our side. And like, this documentary just really shows how the ex-gay movement had a grasp of how to use ideology as a weapon and make it politically useful. And like, Yvette is the kind of person who like understands, that not every argument is black and white, but if you can make it black and white enough to get people to vote and to mobilize them, her organizing is ultimately, her reaction to how successful her Prop 8, campaigns were is what eventually kicked her out of the movement, when she realized that she played an instrumental part in getting Prop 8 passed. And, she is a very interesting character.
Prop 8 also was kind of like alarm bell for a lot of these people, where, I mean, even one man specifically states, like, that was kind of the wake-up call when you see how the gay community reacted. Like, I was 9 when that happened, and I still remember, I think me and Michael watched the news when that was happening, and just being like, well, this sucks. But thankfully, Obama's got us, and we're gonna be okay. I just miss those optimism days. But, like, at that time, it's also hard to remember, Obama came in, Luke, gay marriage, we're going to talk about it later, and it was a very different political time. We went from, like, an extremely homophobic president to we'll talk about it later president, while the bluest state is out here going, actually, gay marriage is bad. Like, that's a scary time to exist, when it looks like both political parties are going, actually, gay people shouldn't have rights. Your options are looking very limited.
Well, and it's important to note, right, like, because of the nature of our two-party system, they do have to exist in opposition to each other. But conservatives in this country always have the luxury of being a bit more ideological than progressives. So progressives kind of looked at something like Prop 8 and went, we have to win those voters too. So Obama was actually noted back in his state Senate campaign to be supportive of same-sex marriage all the way back in the 90s. But when he ran for president, there was not a national figure who could run on that platform and win. And in fact, in 2012, when a certain guy, I don't know if you guys have heard of him, a Mr. Joseph Robinette Biden said, hey.
His middle name is Robinette?
Robinette
Yes.
Biden, yep.
He's Robinette?
Yeah.
Robinette, but yeah.
Yeah.
No, he's Robinette.
All right.
No. He got on TV and went, yeah, I like gay marriage. I've loved Will and Grace since the 90s. I think gay people are great. What's your problem? And his staffers went, what the fuck just happened? Legitimately, there were legitimate thought leaders who said that election is lost based on that issue. And that was 2012. Like, that was 10 years ago, which sounds like a long time. It really isn't.
Michael, you're going to want to probably put your Twitter account on private. Last time you sent this fact, you spent 3 weeks getting attacked by straight leftists. So
Right.
it's just going to be a long
You're
couple
right, I
weeks
did.
for you. Yeah, you did.
You're right. Whenever I talk about the nuances of queer politics, it's like queer people DM me and are like, "That's interesting. We should talk about it." And then straight people who politically I am pretty aligned with call me like a neoliberal centrist. So come at me, dude.
Oh, it's going to be a long couple weeks watching Michael fight for his life out there. Like, comment, and subscribe if you think Michael is a neoliberal fascist.
I am neither of those things. Anyway, yeah, I think that this was actually a very interesting look in, our culture at the time. Our culture really was in such a backwards place even just 10 years ago when Exodus kind of crumbled. And the original founder of Exodus is one of the people on here. And, he is XX gay. He is the one that said, hey, Prop 8, this was a wake-up call for me. I can't believe this is happening. I'm watching what I knew to be my community fight this, and I was feeling for them. And, when he talks about kind of the early days of this movement, it was, I saw that church groups had places for, alcoholics and people who wanted to quit smoking, and wondered why there was no place for people who wanted to end their same-sex attraction. And it's just like, none of us can be surprised that this is the outcome of a politics that teaches that, being gay is a sin, and that it's a sin alongside all of these other, temptations and, addictions. Like, no wonder there are people who are thinking this. And before you know it, it's snowballed into this movement. And I actually don't think anyone who started one of these small church groups could have ever imagined what they would grow into. I think it's impossible to predict something like this.
Because at the very beginning, it was a sense of community. Like, I'm not the only person going through this. I think they're like, there's one at every church. And like, I understand that, like, seeking out, making sure that there are other people like that with you, and the idea of, like, joining together, and then it just got way out of control. Do you want to talk a little bit about, like, what was the, straw that broke the camel's back there? Like, the big confrontational moment that kind of made a lot of the members go like, uh-oh.
I think you should take it away. I've been talking a lot this episode. Tell us about it.
All right, so there, I think it was Julie, because she was in charge of the, like, social media, and she just said at one point, I would, there's a lot of stories coming out of, ex-gay members, and a lot of them are saying that they were hurt, and I just want to say, I'm sorry, and that God loves you, and I'd love to hear their stories. So a leader in the XX gay community was like, are you serious about this? Because I can set up a meeting where you can talk to these people face to face. And she did along with the head of the organization at the time. He was also there. I don't remember his name. And they just sat there and were told the stories you can assume. I am very happy the documentary didn't really touch into it with detail, as we said, but they were told all of the things that forced conversion, comes with, all of the terrible ins and outs of it. And Julie at one point is like, I felt like I was sitting on the wrong side. Like, I should have been over there with them telling my story, because I felt I related to it. And once you look the victims of your movement in the eye, while you are also dealing with the exact same things that they're dealing with, I think these people, you can't deny what's going on anymore. And I think that's why the whole thing popped. I think it was ballooning for a long time. They were, patching stuff up as members came and went. But the church, the organization, acknowledging that there are victims, and victims that are severely suffering, and that, this goes all the way to the top. Even the people running it are victims. And that's kind of where it exploded, and that's where my thoughts got even more jumbled of how I felt about these people running it.
So I agree with almost everything there except the part about people running it. Because it's important to note that Jerry Falwell and James Dobson were the ones running it, right? We can talk about the actual ex-gay ministries, but these were figureheads. These were mouthpieces for a movement, right? Yvette was told, you make a great face for this because you're charismatic, you don't look like a lesbian, and you have a Hispanic last name. She was told by white men that. I just think we can't quite untie that knot without recognizing, Falwell and Dobson really were the leaders of this movement, and that even when it's kind of the same conversation that we should have about MLMs, right? Yes, there is this insidious part about, women selling success to other women, but also who is selling that success to them, right? In the same way that ex-gay people, ex-trans people selling this message to gay and trans youth in particular is disgusting and immoral and wrong. But where did they get those messages? They didn't. It's not like they sprouted from Zeus's head like Athena one day and just came into this world fully formed saying, hey, what if we converted gay people, right? That comes from somewhere. And it comes from your Dobsons, your Falwells.
I kind of think this is a good springboard onto, do you guys want to talk a little bit about where we ended up emotionally, feeling about, because I feel like the entire documentary is being, you are walking through these people's emotional journeys with them. And, I think it's important to unpack what our emotions towards all of this are, unless you guys think that, might be a little weird to do on the cast.
I mean, I'm a straight person. I mean, my thoughts were, man, it must have been hard to be gay. That's a bad break.
King shit right there. Can we get a round of applause?
Tell us you're a Scorpio without telling us you're a Scorpio. Must suck to have feelings, huh?
Yeah. So, Aaron, what nuanced opinions do you have about gay people being used as mouthpieces for an anti-gay movement?
Listen,
Aaron loved gay people until this podcast.
Yeah, no, this podcast is just a huge document of my, history of homophobia. So if you want to hear my actual thoughts on gay people, listen to the episodes where it's just me and Josh.
Because Aaron does not think I am gay because I'm bi.
That's not
just
true,
like Yvette.
for the record.
No, that's a huge joke. I'm sorry, Aaron. But I guess the reason I want to have this conversation is because I think the entire point of the doc that I got from it was that you can be a victim while also being part of the abusive cycle. And I didn't come out of it with looking at these people going like they've redeemed themselves, they've done it. Like my brain just doesn't quite work like that anymore. And it came with it being these are complicated people with complicated emotions. They did terrible things, and it looks like they are on their way to try to just make it a little better now. And I think that's kind of the best place I can land with it. Like, I still look at them with a lot of anger for like the hatred that they spewed, but I think so much of that is projecting into, you know, fear of what all of us could have been on the wrong couple turns on the wheel of time. But yeah, I think these are, like I said, complicated people. They did some pretty fucked up shit, but from my understanding, it looks like most of them are trying to be better. And also the last scene of the documentary with I can't remember the guy's name.
Jeffrey.
Jeffrey, yeah. So it ends with Jeffrey, the ex-trans person we mentioned at the beginning, and they're saying like, they're talking about this new movement, and it ends with him getting like set up for his interview, and my emotions towards him are also like, it kind of leaves you sitting on like, what do you think of that? And they are also very complex, and you know, it's hard to watch someone be abused by a system also participate in the abuse.
Yeah, I mean, like, with regards to Jeffrey, like, I think he's definitely a sympathetic character, but, you know, where my personal philosophy comes down is, like, we can only judge people by their actions. So, you know, with these XX gay leaders, we can absolutely condemn what they did in the past, and we can, you know, be thankful that they are working to undo that harm now. And with Jeffrey, you know, we have to condemn. Like, I checked his what is it called, the Freedom March Facebook page. In this documentary, you know, it had 4,000 likes. This morning, it had 10,000. Like, that movement is gaining momentum and is probably going to hurt people. So I mean, we people are complicated, but if you're going to judge them what they are doing now, right?
Yeah. I mean, and also I think just something very important. This only came out last month. This is an article in The Advocate. So Jeffrey McCall has admitted to hooking up with several men since last year. In a Facebook post, he said, "Today I'm going to share an extremely personal story. I want to share my falling short of the glory of God. I never want to be someone who can't share my own struggles. In 2020, I met someone I was trying to help, which led to me being unfaithful to Jesus and giving my heart away. After denying what I wanted with him, then I went on to fall sexually with a man when I felt wounded and lonely. This led to multiple falls with men over time." He said that he repented after every hookup, that his relationship with God is even stronger. And yeah, I read that and feel multiple things. I think I start from a place with all of these people of empathy, of being caught up in such a, you know, hate-filled culture, in conservative mainline evangelical religions, where it's like, okay, we are going to tell you that your nature, your being is wrong. We are going to sex shame just about everything and kind of create this double bind where you can't win. I, of course, feel anger for fellow queer people who are often victimized by this. And, you know, the director of the documentary kind of put this out to both those who survived conversion therapy and those especially who didn't. And I kind of feel like that's who this is about, even though it's focused on the leaders. And I think I understand the movement perhaps more after watching this. But yeah, I can't untie a certain human empathy. I don't believe that human beings are good or evil. I think that we all make a series of actions and choices. And I think legitimately hearing these stories, it's hard to deny everyone thought they were doing what's right. And a lot of them now are trying to untie a lot of that and undo a lot of that. It's really not up to me to decide if their behavior is penance for that, that actually doesn't matter so much for me. It's, hey, I hope you and I and all of us here do the most good for the most people and kind of do our best and learn from our mistakes. And some mistakes are grander in scale, right? Like, I had my own getting caught up in the conservative Christian movement. I never had a speaking gig on Fox News, right? But that could be just as harmful to an individual as someone else's can. And yeah, I legitimately hope that Jeffrey is able to find a life that is less stressful. This sounds very stressful to be caught up in something like that. And I hope that everyone involved, much like I said during the row, like, I hope they spend the rest of their lives trying to untie this knot, because that's kind of what we need them to do.
And just as we're kind of getting close to the end here, I have tried very hard, because I do look at our podcast as a bit more of a comedy-centric one, to make sure that the jokes are put in at the right places and the emotions get their moment. But I do want to say, from now on, I'm referring to all gay sex as a fall with a man. Because that is very funny to me. I think I might just refer to all sex as a fall.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I also will always appreciate practicing homosexual. Personally, I'm pretty good at it, but practice makes perfect, boys.
I'm a professional. A professional homosexual. I get paid for it.
Oh, wow. I've been out here doing this for free, like, out in the open for 10 fucking years, and my own brother is just now telling me that they get paid for this.
Well, yeah, anytime I look at someone of a different gender that I think is attractive, Mountain Dew gives me $5 to run up to them and mention the Baja Blast.
I don't even know if that qualifies as sex work.
My sex sure does work.
Well, when we're not shilling for...
No! Aaron!
When
When we're not shilling for major...
that's not where the
soda
companies.
companies.
You know
we
that's
love
not
to
where it
rate
goes.
our episodes. This was entirely intentional. So maybe
kick your
get off my
ass.
dick, Josh.
God damn, he just made more money off of Mountain Dew because of your get off my dick joke.
Damn you, PepsiCo got us again.
Got 30 more cents.
What's our fucking rating for this documentary?
I'm giving this one fall with a man.
I don't. We're in the beta testing phase for a new rating system. I don't know. It made me sad. I guess it's my rating.
This one was so bad it broke Aaron out of the Stations of the Cross.
The cross fell off. It was like the scene in The Conjuring where the crosses fall down.
This is Station 24.
I am going to give this 2 out of 5 Tammy Fays, because that's really what everyone needed in this, is a Tammy Faye figure to hug everyone and say, hey, it's okay to be gay, and God still loves you. And also, fuck religious conservatives. That was Tammy Faye's spirit that I was missing in all of this.
She both meant that figuratively and literally.
Yeah. Twice.
Practice what you preach, baby. So, when we're not alternating between... What is our podcast? We're fucking doing history deep dives, fucking sad...
No, that's enough descriptive there.
I mean, I guess this was a history deep dive, but like sad documentaries. This is ostensibly a comedy podcast, but whenever we're not doing whatever the hell this is, where can people find us on the internet?
I am at Green History on Twitter.
I'm at Michael's Diamonds on Twitter.
I'm at Aaron SXL on Twitter, where I tweet about health policy and tabletop RPGs. You can listen to the other podcast I do at Mortified Pod. Me and Layla did an episode about the Star Wars sequel movies, which should be dropping soon. So check that out if you had feelings. I'm sure some of you did.
I literally got the notification that the podcast, the Mortified, dropped as we were recording this.
Excellent, good. It was a conversation. I think next week we're gonna try to do. Crap! I remembered what we're doing next week. Do y'all remember what we're doing next week?
Not even kind of.
It's
a movie.
It is a movie featuring one Sandra Bullock.
Oh,
watching The Blind Side and
we need this, boys. We
needed just some levity, so we're gonna explore the fucking white saviorism, Christianity, colonialism implications of The Blind Side, I guess. None of us, Josh, you're I think the jockest among us. Do you have feelings about football?
I can't believe you're right.
I know.
I mean, I understand the language. I don't speak it.
Okay, that's close enough. You'll have to be our fucking lead sports analyst, but
I did play it, and I will sprinkle in some of just how absolutely, unbelievably amazing I was at football and all of the great positions they put me in.
Okay, excellent. We'll talk about all of Josh's great positioning next week. But
good news is you have a professional Sandra Bullock correspondent over here. So
okay, perfect. We're gonna finally cover all of our bases, and I will be, of course, the token non-white person. But if this depressing podcast made you cry, just remember that it is okay to cry because even Jesus wept. We'll see you all next week.